I could feel the tension the moment I stepped into the living room. The air was thick, like the calm before a storm. I had been dreading this day, knowing it would be ugly, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine it would spiral out of control this quickly. "How about some wine, honey?" I asked, trying to sound casual, as if this was just another evening and not the moment I was about to drop a bomb that would shatter our lives. She barely looked up from her phone, her attention still glued to the screen as if nothing was wrong. "No, thanks. I'm trying to lose a few pounds," she replied absent-mindedly. I could not help but chuckle, a humorless sound that escaped me before I could stop it. "Or is it because you're on antibiotics after getting gonorrhea on that last cruise with your 304 sisters?" The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. She froze, her eyes wide, finally meeting mine with a mix of shock and horror. I watched her face go pale, and for a moment I thought she might faint. Before she could respond, my oldest daughter, who wasn't supposed to be part of this conversation at all, turned to me and said, "Daddy, I have something else to tell you." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. The words didn't make sense. We don't have children, no kids to shield from this disaster. But there she was, looking at me with eyes so eerily similar to Linda S., waiting for a response. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Was this some kind of sick joke? Did she think dragging this imaginary daughter into the conversation would distract me, make me forget about the betrayal she had been hiding? But there was something in those eyes, something desperate, pleading. Linda, my wife, had gone pale as a ghost. For a second, I thought she was going to deny everything, as she always did. But instead, she just stood there, completely mute, as if the wind had been knocked out of her. There was no excuse ready this time, no feigned innocence to shield herself from the truth that had been exposed. I was beyond angry. This wasn't just about the cheating anymore. It was about everything. Every lie, every deceitful smile, every time she'd looked me in the eye and pretended we were still the perfect couple. I wasn't just angry, I was broken. This was the woman I'd given my life to, the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my everything. And now, in the face of her infidelity, she couldn't even muster the courage to defend herself. But then there was this girl, this phantom daughter, sitting on the couch with us, like she had always been part of our lives. She was staring at me, waiting for me to say something, and it was clear she had something important to reveal. How could this be happening? Who the hell was this child, and what could she possibly have to add to this nightmare? I glanced at Linda, looking for some clue, some sign that this was all a mistake, but she was just as bewildered as I was. And that when it hit me, this wasn't just about the two of us anymore. The deception had layers, deeper, darker layers than I had ever imagined. "Daddy?" the girl repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, just listen." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them both disappear, but I couldn't. Not with that look in her eyes, that pleading look that told me this was far from over. So I sat down, took a deep breath, and braced myself for whatever hell was about to unfold next. I stared at this girl, my supposed daughter, my mind struggling to grasp what was happening. Her words were like a key in a lock, opening a door I never knew existed, and I felt something stir inside me, a deep, gnawing sense of dread, like I was about to discover something far worse than the betrayal I had just exposed. "Go on," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "What do you need to tell me?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak. Linda remained frozen, her face still drained of color. The silence in the room was suffocating. "There's more you don't know, Daddy," the girl said quietly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mom has been hiding other things too." Linda flinched at that, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it didn't escape my notice. My anger flared up again, but this time it was tempered by curiosity and fear. What else could she possibly have hidden from me? "What things?" I asked, my tone sharp. The girl hesitated, glancing at Linda as if seeking her permission. Linda's eyes were wide, her lips trembling, but she didn't say a word. The girl turned back to me and continued, "It's about the man she's been seeing. It's not just one, Daddy. There is more." More! The word echoed in my mind, bouncing around like a stray bullet, ripping through any remaining semblance of control I had. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but deep down, I knew it was true. The signs had always been there, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the cold distance that had crept into our marriage long before the cruise. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The girl looked down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I don't know exactly, but it's been going on for a while. Before the cruise, before everything." My mind reeled, trying to piece together the fragments of my shattered reality. This wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was a pattern, a way of life for her. My wife had been living a double life, lying to me for who knows how long, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I turned to Linda, my anger boiling over. "Is this true? Have you been seeing other men?" Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. "Mark, I never meant for it to happen like this. I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. It just got out of control." "Out of control?" I spat, my voice rising. "You didn't just cheat on me once. You've been lying to me, sleeping with other men, God knows how many, and you think you can just apologize and make it all go away?" I was confused, she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I love you, Mark. I do, but I was unhappy and I didn't know how to fix it." "Unhappy?" I laughed bitterly. "So you fixed it by fucking other men? That is how you dealt with your unhappiness?" Linda broke down then, her body shaking with sobs. But I didn't feel sympathy, only rage and disgust. I felt like I was losing my mind, like the woman I had married had been replaced by a stranger, a hollow shell of the person I thought I knew. I couldn't bear to look at her, so I turned back to the girl. "Why are you telling me this now? Who are you?" She wiped her eyes, looking at me with a mix of sadness and determination. "Because you deserve to know the truth, Daddy. And because I am part of the truth, too." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Part of the truth? What do you mean?" She hesitated, and then she dropped the bombshell I never saw coming. "I'm not your daughter, Mark. I am the daughter of one of the men Mom was with. She thought I wouldn't remember, but I do." The room spun, my mind struggling to comprehend what she had just said. "You're not what? No, that's not possible. This can't be happening." Linda sobbed louder, but I couldn't focus on her. I was too busy trying to piece together the nightmare that had become my life. "I'm sorry, Daddy," the girl whispered, "but there's more you need to know." The world around me seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the edge of the couch to steady myself. "Not my daughter," I muttered, the words slipping from my mouth as if saying them would somehow make them untrue. But they hung in the air, a stark and painful reality. The girl, no, the young woman, because now that I looked at her, she wasn't as young as I had first thought, watched me with eyes filled with pity. It was the kind of look you give someone who's just been hit by a truck, and the realization cut me deeper than any of Linda's betrayals. "What do you mean you are not my daughter?" I finally asked, though a part of me was terrified of the answer. My voice was ragged, barely holding together under the strain. The girl, her name was Jessica, I realized in that moment, as if the knowledge had always been there, buried beneath layers of deception, took a deep breath before speaking. "I know this is hard to hear, but I am not your biological daughter. My real father, he is one of the men Mom was with before you two got married. She thought she could keep it a secret, but I found out. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to hurt you, but now you need to know the truth." Linda's sobs grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of guilt and despair. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer weight of what I was hearing. "Linda," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "is this true? Is she as Jessica, not mine?" Linda couldn't look at me. She just nodded, her face buried in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she choked out between sobs. "I never wanted you to find out. I thought I could make it work, that we could be a family, but everything has fallen apart." My mind flashed back to all those moments, Jessica's birth, her first steps, her first words. Had all of it been a lie? Had I been living in a fantasy, raising a child that wasn't mine, while the woman I loved kept this secret from me? How long? I asked, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. How long have you known? Since before we got married, Linda admitted, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze was desperate, pleading. But I loved you, Mark. I loved you, and I knew you would be a good father to her. I didn't want to lose you. Lose me? I echoed, feeling like I was going to be sick. You lost me the moment you decided to lie about something like this. You lost me when you cheated, when you let me believe that Jessica was my daughter. Do you have any idea what you have done? Linda's tears kept flowing, but I had no sympathy left to give. The betrayal was too deep, too all-encompassing. I felt like I had been hollowed out, every emotion, every ounce of trust, stripped away until there was nothing left but the raw pain of her deceit. I didn't know what to do, Linda whispered. I was scared, Mark. I didn't want to be alone. I thought if I told you, you'd leave me. You're right, I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. I would have left. And now, I don't know what to do, because I'm looking at a woman I don't even recognize. You've destroyed everything, Linda. Everything we built. Everything I believed in. Jessica. My not daughter watched us in silence, her eyes filled with regret and sadness. But there was something else there too, something that made my heart clench. Daddy, she said softly, stepping closer to me. I know I'm not your biological daughter, but you've always been my dad. I don't want that to change. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the girl I had raised, the girl who had called me daddy from the moment she could speak, the girl who had run to me when she scraped her knee, who had hugged me tight after every bedtime story, the girl who had always been my daughter in every way that mattered. And in that moment I realized that, despite everything, she was still my daughter. No blood test could take that away. But it didn't change the fact that Linda had lied to me, that she had shattered our lives with her secrets. I don't know what's going to happen, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But Jessica, you'll always be my daughter. That is not going to change. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged me tightly, her small frame trembling against mine. I hugged her back, holding on as if she was the only thing keeping me grounded. But even as I held her, my mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. The betrayal was too deep to ignore, and I knew that whatever came next, it would change everything. I released Jessica and turned to Linda, who was watching us with a mixture of hope and fear. Linda, we need to talk about everything, but not here and not now. I need time to think. Linda nodded, her tear-streaked face showing the devastation she had caused. I'll give you all the time you need, Mark, she whispered. Just please don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew that the U.S. she was hoping for might already be gone. The drive to the hotel was silent. I couldn't stay in the house that night, not with Linda's confessions still echoing in my ears, and definitely not after what Jessica had revealed. I needed space, needed time to think, so I packed a bag and left, leaving Linda to deal with her mess. The hotel room was sterile and cold, a far cry from the warmth of home, but I welcomed the emptiness. I tossed my bag on the bed and sat down in the corner chair, my mind racing, heart pounding. I couldn't believe any of this was real. How could everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, be so utterly wrong? I poured myself a drink from the minibar, the alcohol burning its way down my throat, but it did nothing to numb the pain. The betrayal cut too deep, and every time I thought I could wrap my head around it, another wave of anger and disbelief would crash over me. Jessica wasn't my daughter. Linda had known all along, yet she had let me believe the lie for years. It wasn't just the cheating that broke me. It was this fundamental lie at the core of my life. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The way Linda had grown distant over the years, the arguments that had started for no reason, the excuses she'd given when I questioned where she'd been. And then, there were the men the others Jessica had mentioned. It was clear now that the cruise wasn't the start, it was just the latest chapter in a long history of deceit. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached for it, expecting another message from Linda, but it wasn't her. It was an unknown number, and I debated whether or not to answer. Something in me said I should, so I did. Hello? There was a pause on the other end before a man's voice spoke, low and tense. Is this Mark? I tensed. Who is asking? Mark, it's Jim Richards. I froze. Jim Richards. I knew that name. Jessica had said her real father was one of Linda's past lovers, and it was clear this was him, the man who had unknowingly helped destroy my life. What do you want? I growled, my grip tightening on the phone. I need to talk to you, Jim said, his voice firm. It's about Linda, and it's about Jessica. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You have some nerve calling me after what you and Linda have done. Mark, listen, Jim interrupted, his tone urgent. I didn't know about Jessica until recently. Linda kept it from me too. But that's not why I'm calling. I didn't want to hear any more, but something kept me on the line. Then why are you calling? Because there is something you need to know, Jim said, his voice dropping lower. Something about Linda. She's not just cheating on you, Mark. She's been lying to both of us, and it's worse than you think. I didn't respond right away, my mind racing. I had thought I knew the worst of it, that I had uncovered the depth of Linda's betrayal. But here was this man, this stranger, telling me that there was more to the nightmare I was already living. What are you talking about? I finally asked, my voice raw. I can explain everything over the phone, Jim said. But I need to meet with you face to face. There are things you need to see, things that I only found out recently. It is not just about the affair, Mark. It is about who Linda really is. My blood ran cold. Who Linda really is. What did that even mean? I was already in the middle of a hell I didn't know how to escape from, and now there was more? I wasn't sure I could take it. Why should I trust you? I demanded, anger rising in my chest. You don't have to trust me, Jim replied. But if you care about finding out the truth, if you care about Jessica, you will meet with me. Tomorrow night at the coffee shop on 5th Street, 7 o'clock. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to hang up the phone and never speak to this man again. But something else, something deep down, buried under layers of rage and confusion, told me I needed to hear him out. Fine, I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. But if this is some kind of trick, I swear to God it's not a trick, Mark, Jim cut in. It is the truth. I'll see you tomorrow. The line went dead, and I was left sitting in the silence of the hotel room, the weight of the conversation settling on my shoulders. What could be worse than what I already knew? And why did Jim Richards, of all people, think he was the one who should tell me? I finished my drink and poured another, staring out the window at the dark city streets below. Tomorrow night would bring answers I wasn't sure I wanted. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and whether I liked it or not, I was going to find it. I barely slept that night. My mind wouldn't shut off, replaying everything over and over, the lies, the betrayal, and now the possibility that there was something even worse waiting for me. By the time morning came, I felt like a zombie, drained of everything except a simmering anger that I couldn't shake. I spent the day trying to distract myself, but nothing worked. I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was the meeting with Jim Richards, the man who had unknowingly fathered the child I had raised as my own. The man who now claimed to have more secrets to reveal about Linda, my wife, the woman who had shattered my world. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, I was on edge, my nerves frayed. I drove to the coffee shop, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted him right away, Jim Richards, sitting alone at a corner table by the window, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, his expression tense. As I walked in, the bell above the door chimed softly, and Jim's eyes met mine. There was a moment of mutual acknowledgement, a shared understanding that we were both here because of her. Mark, he greeted me as I sat down across from him, his voice cautious, almost hesitant. Jim, I replied, keeping my tone neutral, though the anger was bubbling just beneath the surface. You said there's something I need to know, so talk. Jim nodded, took a sip of his coffee, and then placed the cup down carefully, as if he was trying to buy himself a few more seconds to figure out how to start. First of all, I am sorry for everything I never knew about Jessica. Linda never told me. If I'd known spare me the apologies, I cut him off, my patience thin. Just get to the point. What is it that I need to know? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Linda, she's not who you think she is. I don't just mean the affair. There's more to her past than you have been led to believe. I frowned, my irritation growing. What are you talking about? Just say it. Jim leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been doing some digging since I found out about Jessica. I started looking into Linda's history, her life before she met either of us. And what I found it's not good, Mark. It's not good at all. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? What did you find? He hesitated for a moment, then pulled a folder from the seat next to him and slid it across the table to me. Everything Sia's in there. The documents, the photos, the police reports. She's been hiding things from you, from everyone, for a long time. I stared at the folder, my heart pounding. This was it, whatever Jim had uncovered. It was in here. My hands shook as I opened the folder, flipping through the papers inside. The first thing that caught my eye was an old newspaper clipping, dated more than 15 years ago. Local woman suspected in missing persons case, the headline read, and beneath it, a grainy photo of a younger Linda stared back at me. My breath caught in my throat as I read the article, detailing how Linda had been questioned by the police in connection with the disappearance of a man she had been involved with. The case had gone cold, and Linda had never been charged, but the suspicion lingered, tainting her reputation. I looked up at Jim, my mind racing. What the hell is this? Keep reading, Jim urged, his voice grim. I turned to the next page, a police report, detailing an incident in another town, years before she met me. Another man, another mysterious disappearance, with Linda's name mentioned as a person of interest. Again, no charges, no proof, just a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. This can be real, I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. There's no way it's real, Mark, Jim said quietly. I verified everything. Linda has a past, and it's a dark one. She's been running from it for years, hiding it from everyone, but it's all there in the records if you know where to look. I flipped through more pages, photos of Linda with different men, police sketches, statements from neighbors and friends, all painting a picture of a woman who had been living a double life long before I ever met her. My stomach churned as the implications of what I was reading began to sink in. So, what are you saying? I asked, my voice hollow. That Linda is what? Some kind of black widow? That she's been going from man to man, leaving a trail of destruction behind her? Jim hesitated, then nodded. I don't know if she is responsible for those men disappearing, but there's a pattern, Mark. And now, with everything that happened between you two, I thought you needed to know, before it is too late. Too late? I echoed, the words feeling like a noose tightening around my neck. What are you saying, Jim? I'm saying that Linda's dangerous, Mark. More dangerous than either of us realized, and if she feels cornered, who knows what she is capable of? I closed the folder, feeling sick to my stomach. This was too much. I had come here expecting to learn more about her infidelity, to maybe gain some closure on what had happened. But instead, I was staring down the barrel of something far darker, far more terrifying than I could have imagined. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Jim leaned back in his chair, his expression somber. Neither do I. But whatever you decide, just be careful. You can trust her, Mark. Not anymore. The drive back to the hotel was a blur. My mind was in turmoil, the revelations from Jim's folder tearing apart any sense of reality I had left. Linda, my wife, the woman I had loved, the mother of the child I had raised, was not who I thought she was. She was a stranger, a shadow, hiding a past I knew nothing about. When I finally got back to the hotel room, I collapsed onto the bed, the folder still clutched in my hands. I didn't know what to do next, or how to even begin to process what I had just learned. All I knew was that my life had just taken another dark turn, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from the folder played out like a twisted movie reel. Linda's face, staring back at me from those old photos. The haunting words from the newspaper clippings. The police reports that painted her as someone I didn't recognize. It was all too much to take in. By the time the sun started to rise, I felt like I was on the edge of a breakdown. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to confront Linda to see if there was any truth left in her. Could she really have done the things Jim S. Folder suggested? Had she really been living this double life all these years? I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't just sit here and let this fester. I had to face her, had to confront the woman who had turned my world upside down. But I needed to be smart about it, to approach this carefully. If what Jim said was true, Linda was dangerous, more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I left the hotel in a daze, driving back to the house with a sense of dread building in my chest. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a trap, a place where dark secrets lurked in every corner. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Linda S. car parked outside just like always. Everything looked so normal, so painfully ordinary, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before going inside. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the questions I needed to ask. But most of all, I wanted to look her in the eye and see if there was anything left of the woman I thought I knew. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and the familiar scent of home washed over me: coffee, laundry detergent, and a hint of the vanilla candles Linda liked to burn. It all felt so wrong now, like I was walking into someone else's life. Linda was in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared breakfast. The scene was so domestic, so ordinary, that for a moment I almost forgot everything that had happened. Almost. She turned when she heard me come in, a tentative smile on her face. "Mark, you're back," she said softly, her voice filled with relief. "I was so worried about you." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the one I had read about in those reports. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat. Linda S.'s smile faltered, and she set down the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly. "Of course. We can talk about anything you want." I walked over to the kitchen table, the folder still clutched in my hand, and set it down in front of me. "What this, Linda?" She looked down at the folder, confusion flickering across her face. "I don't know. What is it?" "Jim Richards gave it to me," I said, watching her closely. "It's everything he found out about you, your past, the men who disappeared, the police reports." For a moment, Linda just stared at the folder, her face a mask of shock. Then, slowly, she sank into the chair across from me, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark, I can explain," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Explain?" I echoed, my anger rising. "Explain how you have been lying to me for years? How you've been hiding a past filled with missing men and police investigations? How you've been living a life I knew nothing about?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "Not now. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I was young, Mark. I made mistakes. But I swear I'm not the person those reports make me out to be." "Then who are you, Linda?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because the woman I married wouldn't be involved in something like this. The woman I married wouldn't have lied to me about our daughter, wouldn't have cheated on me with God knows how many men." "So who the hell are you?" she sobbed, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm still me, Mark. I am still the woman you fell in love with, the woman who loves you. Please, you have to believe me." "Believe you?" I repeated, incredulous. "You expect me to believe you after everything I've found out? After you've lied to me, betrayed me, and kept these dark secrets from me?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Yes, I lied. Yes, I made mistakes. But I did it because I was scared, because I didn't want to lose you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I shook my head, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "I don't even know what to think anymore, Linda. All I know is that I can trust you, not after this." There was a long silence, the only sound her ragged breathing as she tried to regain control of herself. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something else you need to know, Mark. Something I never told anyone, not even Jim." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "What?" She hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. The men, the ones who disappeared. I didn't kill them, Mark. I swear to God I didn't. But they didn't just leave either. What do you mean? I asked, my mind racing. They were after me, she said, her voice shaking. They were bad men, Mark. I didn't realize it at first, but they were dangerous. And when I tried to leave them, they wouldn't let me. I had to run, to disappear, because I knew if I didn't, they'd come after me. But then, they did disappear, and I didn't know what happened to them. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this the truth? Had Linda been running from these men all along, hiding from a past that was far more sinister than I could have imagined? I wanted to believe her, wanted to find some shred of the woman I loved in the midst of all this darkness. But the doubts still lingered, gnawing at me, telling me that this was just another lie, another story she had concocted to keep me in the dark. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, my voice cold. If what you were saying is true, why didn't you trust me with the truth? Because I was scared, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Scared that you'd leave me, that you'd hate me. I didn't want to lose you, Mark. I didn't want to lose the life we built together. I looked at her, feeling more lost and confused than ever. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, and yet I felt like I didn't know her at all. Everything she said could be true, or it could be another layer of lies. I had no way of knowing anymore. I don't know what to do, I finally admitted, my voice hollow. I don't know how to move forward from this. Linda reached across the table, taking my hand in hers, her touch cold and trembling. Please, Mark, don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll tell you everything, no more secrets. Just please don't walk away. I pulled my hand back, the weight of everything crushing me. I need time, Linda. I need to think. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting for you. I stood up, my legs unsteady as I made my way to the door. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I needed air, needed space to clear my head. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I felt like I was stepping into a void, a place where nothing made sense anymore. My life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know if it could ever be put back together. But one thing was clear, I was no longer sure who Linda really was, and whether the woman I had married was even real. And that was a truth I wasn't sure I could ever come to terms with. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring together as my thoughts spiraled. I couldn't shake the image of Linda's tear-streaked face, the way she had looked at me with such desperation, such fear. But was it real? Could I trust anything she said anymore? The streets were mostly empty, the late hour drawing a quiet blanket over the city. I finally pulled into a dark, secluded parking lot and turned off the engine, the silence settling in like a heavy fog. My mind was a mess, tangled up in all the lies, the secrets, the possibilities of what Linda could have been hiding. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Michael Green, the divorce lawyer Tom had recommended. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Part of me didn't want to do this, didn't want to take that final step toward ending my marriage. But the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by Linda's betrayal, knew that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I pressed the button, and the phone rang twice before Michael's calm, professional voice answered. Michael Green speaking. Michael. ITS Mark Johnson, I said, my voice raw. I need to talk to you about the divorce. There was a pause on the other end, and when Michael spoke again, his tone was measured. Of course, Mark, I'm here to help. Do you want to meet in person, or can we talk now? Now, I replied, running a hand through my hair. I don't want to wait. All right, Michael said, his voice steady. Why don't you tell me what is going on? I took a deep breath and started to explain everything. The affair, the lies about Jessica, and finally the bombshell Jim Richards had dropped about Linda's past. As I spoke, Michael listened in silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask a question or clarify a detail. When I finished, there was a long pause before he spoke again. Mark, this is a lot to take in, he said carefully. But you need to understand that in cases like this, especially with the history you've uncovered. The situation can become very complicated. If what you're saying about Linda S. past is true, it could affect everything: the divorce, custody, even your safety. My safety? I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Yes, Michael said, his tone serious. If Linda is dangerous, or if there's a possibility that she's been involved in criminal activity, you need to be cautious. We need to approach this carefully, not just for your sake, but for Jessica S. as well. I felt a surge of panic. What do I do? How do I handle this? First, we need to gather as much evidence as possible, Michael replied. You need to document everything: conversations, interactions, anything that could be relevant. If you have that folder from Jim Richards, keep it safe. We may need it later. I have it, I said, my voice shaky. But what about the divorce? What do I do now? I can start the paperwork right away, Michael said, but I'd advise you to be careful. If Linda suspects that you are moving forward with a divorce, she might become unpredictable. We'll also need to consider custody arrangements for Jessica. Given the circumstances, it is possible we could secure full custody for you, but it depends on how things play out. Full custody. The words hung in the air, a reminder that this wasn't just about me and Linda, it was about Jessica too. I had promised her that nothing would change, that she would always be my daughter, but now everything was changing. How could I protect her from this nightmare? Mark, Michael continued, his voice gentle, I know this is overwhelming, but you're doing the right thing by seeking help. We'll get through this, but it's going to take time and careful planning. For now, I want you to stay safe and avoid any confrontations with Linda. We need to be strategic. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I'll do what you say. Good, Michael said. I'll start working on the paperwork and get back to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, if anything else comes up, don't hesitate to call me. Thanks, Michael, I said, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I appreciate it. We ended the call, and I sat in the dark, the silence heavy around me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into an abyss, and I had no idea how deep it went. Eventually, I started the car and drove back to the hotel, my thoughts a tangled mess. When I got to my room, I collapsed onto the bed, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept churning, replaying everything over and over: Linda S. lies, Jim S. revelations, the conversation with Michael. It was all too much. In the early hours of the morning, I finally drifted off, but my sleep was restless, filled with dark, twisted dreams. I saw Linda S.'s face, her eyes filled with tears, but behind them, there was something cold, something calculating. I saw Jessica standing alone in a dark room, her face hidden in shadows, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach her. When I woke up, the sunlight streaming through the window, I felt like I had been hit by a truck. My body ached, and my mind was foggy, but there was a new sense of determination growing inside me. I couldn't let Linda control my life any longer. I had to take back control, for my sake and for Jessica S. I got out of bed and started to get dressed, my movements mechanical as I went through the motions. But as I reached for my phone to check the time, it buzzed in my hand, a text message from Linda. Mark, please come home. We need to talk. I can lose you. I love you. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. She was trying to pull me back in, to manipulate me with her words, but I couldn't let that happen. Not now, not after everything. But as much as I wanted to ignore the message, to walk away and never look back, I knew I couldn't. There was too much at stake, too many unanswered questions. I needed to see her, to confront her one last time and get the truth, whatever it was. I took a deep breath and typed a response, my fingers trembling slightly. I'll come home, but this time we're going to get everything out in the open. No more lies, Linda. I mean it. I hit send, and the weight of what I had just agreed to settled over me. This was it, the moment where everything would either come crashing down or finally start to make sense. As I left the hotel and drove back to the house, I tried to prepare myself for whatever was waiting. But no matter how much I braced myself, I knew that nothing could truly prepare me for what was about to happen. The drive back to the house felt like a march towards something inevitable, a confrontation that I had been avoiding for too long. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as I rehearsed what I would say to Linda. Every possible scenario played out in my mind, but none of them brought any sense of closure, just more questions. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood there, as it always had, but it felt different now, like a stage set for the final act of a play that had spiraled out of control. The curtains were drawn, and the door was slightly ajar, as if Linda had been waiting for me, anticipating my return. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead, and pushed the door open. The house was quiet, eerily so. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the foyer, past the living room until I found Linda in the kitchen, sitting at the table. The coffee pot was still full, untouched, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen, but there was something else there, something beyond the tears. Guilt, fear, maybe both. I couldn't tell anymore. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming back. I didn't sit down. I couldn't tea." The tension was too much, the air too thick with the weight of everything that had happened. Instead, I stood across from her, my arms crossed, trying to keep my voice steady. "You said we need to talk. So talk." She winced at the coldness in my tone, but I didn't care. This was it. No more lies, no more secrets. "I know you hate me right now," Linda started, her voice barely above a whisper, "and you have every right to. I have done terrible things, things I am not proud of, but I swear, Mark, I never wanted it to be like this." "Then what did you want, Linda?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "What exactly did you think would happen when you lied to me about everything about Jessica, about the other men, about your past? Did you think I would just accept it?" "No," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know what to think. I was scared, Mark, scared of losing you, scared of what you'd do if you found out. I know I should have told you the truth, but I thought I could make it right somehow. I thought I could fix it." "Fix it?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought you could fix years of lies and betrayal? Linda, you've been living a lie for as long as I've known you. How do you fix that?" She shook her head, sobbing into her hands. "I don't know. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose Jessica." I felt a surge of anger rise in me, but I pushed it down, focusing on what I needed to know. "You said there's more I need to know. So tell me, Linda. Tell me everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I want the full story." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark, please, I don't want to drag you into this." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice firm. "I'm already in it, whether I want to be or not. Now tell me." Linda wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath before she spoke. "It started years before I met you. When I was younger, I made some terrible choices. I got involved with men who weren't good people. They were dangerous. But I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I could handle it, but then things got out of control." She paused, her hands trembling as she continued. "The first man, Daniel, was possessive, controlling. I tried to leave him, but he wouldn't let me. When I finally managed to get away, I thought I was free. But then, he disappeared. The police questioned me, but I didn't know what had happened to him. I still don't tea. What about the others?" I asked, my voice low. "The men who disappeared after him?" "It was the same," Linda said, her voice breaking. "I got involved with men who were controlling, abusive. I tried to leave them, but each time they would disappear. I don't know where they went, Mark. I swear I didn't have anything to do with it. But the police, they kept questioning me. They thought I was involved, but they never had any proof." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "So you're telling me you just happened to get involved with a series of men who all disappeared without a trace? And you had nothing to do with it?" "I know how it sounds," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "But it is the truth. I was scared, Mark, scared that they would hurt me if I didn't leave, and then they just vanished. I don't know what happened to them, but I swear I didn't kill them. I wanted to believe her, but there was too much doubt, too many inconsistencies in her story. Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "Because I was trying to start over," she said, her voice pleading. "I wanted a new life, a life where I didn't have to be afraid all the time. And when I met you, I thought I had finally found that. I thought I could leave the past behind. But you didn't, I said coldly. You kept lying, kept hiding things, and now everything has fallen apart. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know Ivy ruined everything, but Mark, I love you. I love Jessica. I don't want to lose you. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words, the weight of everything that had happened between us. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that there was still something worth salvaging in our marriage. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. I don't know what to do, Linda, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. She reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine, but I pulled away, the pain too raw, too fresh. Mark, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please don't leave me. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll go to counseling. I'll tell you everything. No more secrets. Just please give me another chance. I looked at her, seeing the woman I had loved for so many years, the mother of the child I had raised as my own. But now, she was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had lied to me for so long that I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. I need time, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. I need time to figure out what to do, how to move forward. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting for you. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, the decisions I knew I had to make. But as I turned to leave, to walk out of the house that had once been my home, I knew that things would never be the same again. I drove away, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away, to clear my head. The city lights blurred together as I drove, my mind spinning with everything Linda had said, everything she had confessed. But no matter how hard I tried to find a way forward, I kept coming back to the same question. Could I ever trust her again? Could I ever forgive her for the lies, the betrayal, the secrets that had torn our life apart? I didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty was the most painful part of all. As I drove through the dark, empty streets, I realized that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Linda's past had finally caught up with her, and it had destroyed everything we had built together. The question now was whether I could find a way to rebuild, to move forward, or if this was the end of the road for us. And as I stared out into the night, I knew that the answers wouldn't come easily, if they came at all. I didn't go back to the hotel that night. I couldn't stand the thought of being alone with my thoughts, of sitting in that sterile room and replaying everything Linda had said over and over again. Instead, I found myself driving out to the edge of town, to a small bar I used to frequent in my younger days. It was a place where I could disappear, where no one knew me, and where I could drown my sorrows without judgment. The bar was dimly lit, the smell of stale beer and cigarettes hanging in the air like a heavy fog. A handful of patrons sat scattered around the room, their faces hidden in shadows, nursing their drinks in silence. I slid onto a bar stool, nodding to the bartender as I ordered a whiskey, neat. The first sip burned all the way down, but I welcomed the pain. It was a distraction, something to focus on other than the chaos in my mind. I downed the drink quickly and motioned for another. The bartender obliged, his eyes flicking to me with a hint of concern, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. With the second drink in hand, I leaned back against the bar, staring at the rows of bottles lined up behind the counter. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few days bore down on me, threatening to crush me under its sheer enormity. The love of my life was a stranger, someone with a past so dark and twisted that I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, had been lying to me from the start. How was I supposed to move forward from that? I took another sip, letting the alcohol dull the edges of my thoughts. But no matter how much I drank, I couldn't escape the memories, the images that kept flashing through my mind. Linda's tear-streaked face, her desperate pleas for another chance. The way she had looked at me, as if I was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could forgive her, if I could ever trust her again. But at the same time, the thought of walking away, of leaving everything behind, felt like ripping out a piece of my soul. Rough night? A voice interrupted my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I glanced to my left and saw a man sitting a few stools down, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was older, with graying hair and a worn leather jacket that looked like it had seen better days. Something like that, I muttered, not really in the mood for conversation. He nodded, taking a sip of his own drink. Women trouble? I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. You could say that. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to resonate with years of hard-earned wisdom. Ain't it always the way? Women'll tear you up, make you question everything you thought you knew. I didn't respond, just took another drink, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But he didn't. Instead, he shifted closer, turning slightly to face me. I've seen that look before, he said, his voice softer now. You're at a crossroads, trying to figure out which way to go. I looked over at him, really seeing him for the first time. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and there was a depth to them that made me think he knew exactly what he was talking about. Yeah, I admitted, surprising myself with my honesty. I don't know what to do. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. You're not alone, you know. We've all been there, one way or another. It's part of life, part of figuring out who we are and what we can live with. What if I can live with it? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The man took a deep breath, considering his answer carefully. Then maybe it is time to let go. Sometimes holding on too tight is what destroys us in the end. Let go, I repeated, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. It was something I had been avoiding, something I didn't want to think about. But hearing it from someone else, from a stranger who had no stake in my life, made it seem more real, more possible. I'm not saying it's easy, the man continued, his voice low and steady. But sometimes, letting go is the only way to find peace. You can keep holding on to something that has already gone, something that has been broken beyond repair. I stared into my glass, the amber liquid swirling as I thought about what he was saying. Could I really walk away? Could I leave Linda, leave Jessica, and start over? The idea of it was terrifying, but so was the thought of staying in a marriage built on lies. I don't know if I am strong enough, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You are stronger than you think, the man said, his tone reassuring. But you've got to make the choice. No one else can do it for you. I nodded slowly, the truth of his words settling in. He was right. I had to make a choice, one way or the other. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, couldn't keep torturing myself with what-ifs and maybes. It was time to face the reality of my situation, no matter how painful it was. I finished my drink, setting the empty glass down on the bar with a sense of finality. The man watched me, a knowing look in his eyes. Thanks, I said, offering him a small, grateful smile. I needed that. He nodded, raising his glass in a silent toast. Take care of yourself, kid. Life's too short to spend it being miserable. I stood up, feeling a little steadier on my feet, a little more sure of what I needed to do. I left the bar without looking back, the cold night air hitting me like a wake-up call. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep running from it. I had to face it head-on, no matter how much it hurt. As I drove back to the hotel, my mind was clearer, more focused. I knew what I needed to do, and even though it scared the hell out of me, I was ready to take that step. When I got back to my room, I sat down at the small desk, pulling out a piece of paper and a pen. I stared at the blank page for a long time, the weight of the decision I was about to make pressing down on me. Finally, I started to write. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, but then they began to flow, each sentence a little easier than the last. I wrote until I had said everything I needed to say, until there was nothing left but the truth. When I was done, I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a sense of finality. I stared at it for a moment, the weight of what I had just done settling over me. Then I placed it on the desk, knowing that when the time came, I would give it to Linda. It was a letter of goodbye, a letter that explained everything, that told her I couldn't do it anymore, that I couldn't keep living in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. It was the hardest thing I had ever written, but it was also the most honest. I knew that when I gave it to her, it would be the end of everything we had built together. But I also knew that it was the only way to find peace, the only way to start healing. As I crawled into bed, exhausted but strangely at peace, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life, like I was making a choice that was truly my own. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that whatever happened next, I would face it head on, with the strength that I had found within myself. Because sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that set us free.